I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw the construction crew working in what looked suspiciously like my backyard. It was a Tuesday morning in late April, and I had just returned from a week-long business trip to Seattle. My house in Riverside, California had been quiet when I left, nestled in the planned community of Oak Ridge Estates, where every mailbox looked the same, and the HOA rules were thicker than a phone book. Now, there were 3 men in hard hats installing fence posts along a line that cut straight through what I was absolutely certain was my property. I got out of my car slowly, my briefcase still in hand, staring at the scene. The fence posts were already cemented in, and 2 of the workers were unrolling chain link material, while the third operated a post hole digger for the remaining sections. The fence line started at the property boundary I shared with my neighbor, Helen Patterson. But instead of following the actual property line, it veered significantly into my yard, claiming a massive strip of land that included part of my garden bed and nearly reached my storage shed. Helen was standing on what she clearly believed was her side of the new fence, arms crossed, wearing a polo shirt with the Oak Ridge Estates HOA logo embroidered on it. Of course. She had been the HOA president for the past 3 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to fine every resident for the smallest infractions. Last year, she had tried to fine me $200 because my grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall. I had measured it myself and proved her wrong, but the interaction had set the tone for our relationship. "Helen," I called out, walking toward the fence line, "what exactly is going on here?" She turned to face me with that particular expression she reserved for people she considered beneath her, a combination of disdain and forced patience. "Hello, Carter. I am installing a new fence along our property line. As HOA president, I have every right to clearly delineate property boundaries." "That is not the property line," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "That fence is at least 8 feet into my yard." "I beg your differ," Helen said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "I had the property line verified, and this is exactly where it should be. Perhaps you are confused about where your property actually ends." I looked at the fence line again, doing quick mental calculations. When I had bought this house 4 years ago, the survey had been crystal clear. The property line between our houses ran in a straight path from the street to the back boundary, marked by old iron stakes that the original developer had placed when Oak Ridge Estates was built in 1998. This new fence was nowhere near those stakes. "Show me your documentation," I said. Helen's expression hardened. "I do not need to show you anything, Carter. As HOA president, I have the authority to ensure property lines are properly maintained. If you have an issue with this fence, you can file a formal complaint with the HOA board." "You are the HOA board president, Helen." "You are telling me to file a complaint with yourself. The board has 5 members, she replied coolly. "Your complaint would be heard by all of us. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to supervise this installation. I suggest you move your car so the crew can continue working without obstruction." I stood there for a moment, watching as the workers continued their job, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation but not willing to stop without orders from whoever was paying them. Helen had turned her back to me, effectively ending the conversation in her mind. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, documenting every angle of the fence installation, the position relative to my shed, my garden beds, and the old property markers I could see poking up from the ground a good 8 feet away from where the new fence was going up. Inside my house, I dropped my briefcase on the kitchen counter and immediately started searching through my files. It took me 20 minutes to find the survey from when I had purchased the property, but there it was, clear as day. The document showed the exact property line, and it was nowhere near where Helen was putting her fence. According to my survey, she was claiming approximately 8 feet of depth across about 60 feet of width, which meant she was essentially stealing close to 500 square feet of my land. I called the surveying company that had done my original property survey, a firm called Martinez and Associates out of Riverside. A woman answered on the third ring. Martinez and Associates, this is Rebecca speaking. Hi, my name is Carter Kelly, and you did a survey on my property at 847 Maple Grove Drive 4 years ago. I need to schedule an emergency resurvey. My neighbor is installing a fence that I believe is significantly over my property line. Let me pull up your file, Rebecca said. I heard typing in the background. Yes, I see your property here. Mr. Kelly, our next available appointment for a full boundary survey is not until next month, but given what you are describing, let me see if I can have someone come out this week. Can you hold? Absolutely. The hold music was some generic instrumental that did nothing to calm my nerves. I watched through my kitchen window as the fence crew continued working, making steady progress. Each post they planted felt like a violation, a theft happening in slow motion right before my eyes. Mr. Kelly. Rebecca was back. I spoke with Tom Martinez himself, and he remembers your property. He said he can come out tomorrow morning at 8 if that works for you. That is perfect. Thank you so much. No problem. He will need access to walk the entire boundary, so please make sure any gates are unlocked. He will bring the original survey documents and his equipment. A full resurvey with detailed documentation will cost $1,500. Is that acceptable? I did not even hesitate. Yes, that is fine. After hanging up, I went back outside. The fence crew was taking a break, sitting in the shade of Helen's oak tree while drinking water from a cooler. Helen herself had gone inside, probably to admire her handiwork from her back window. I approached the workers, keeping my expression friendly. Hey guys, sorry to bother you, but can I ask who hired you for this job? The oldest of the three, a man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin, looked uncomfortable. Lady next door, the HOA president. She said everything was approved and legal. Did she show you a survey or any property documents? He shook his head. She just showed us where she wanted the fence. We are just doing the installation, man. We do not get involved in property line disputes. That is between you and her. I understand. I am not blaming you guys. But I am having a surveyor come out tomorrow morning, and I am pretty sure this fence is on my property. You might want to slow down the installation until that is resolved. The man exchanged glances with his coworkers. We will mention it to her, but she is paying us. If she says keep going, we have to keep going. That was fair, and I told them so. I went back inside and spent the next few hours researching property law in California, HOA regulations, and what my options were if Helen refused to move the fence. The more I read, the angrier I became. What she was doing was not just a HOA overreach, it was potential trespassing and land theft. If she had genuinely believed the property line was where she was putting the fence, she would have gotten a survey first. The fact that she had not suggested, she knew exactly what she was doing. That evening, I sent a certified letter to Helen, copying all the other HOA board members, formally disputing the fence placement and informing them that I had a surveyor coming the next morning. I also sent an email to the same group, wanting to create a digital paper trail. Within an hour, I received a response from Helen. Dear Carter, your objection has been noted. However, the fence installation will continue as planned. The HOA has every right to maintain clear property boundaries, and your survey from 4 years ago may not be accurate. Property lines can shift due to land movement and other factors. If you wish to dispute this further, you may hire your own surveyor, but the fence will remain where it is. Regards, Helen Patterson, HOA President. I read the email 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. Property lines do not just shift. That was not how surveying worked. She was either completely ignorant of basic property law, or she was banking on me being too intimidated or too cheap to fight back. She had picked the wrong person. The next morning, Tom Martinez arrived at exactly 8 with a younger assistant and equipment that looked like it belonged on a NASA mission. Tom was in his 60s, with gray hair and the careful, precise manner of someone who had spent his entire career measuring things down to the inch. "Mr. Kelly, good to see you again," he said, shaking my hand. "Rebecca told me about your situation. Let us take a look." I walked him around to the backyard where the fence was now about 70% complete. Tom stopped when he saw it, his eyebrows rising. "Well, that is definitely not where the property line is," he said immediately. "I remember your survey very clearly. The original stakes are still there, see?" He pointed to an iron stake poking up from the ground, almost completely overgrown with grass but visible if you knew what to look for. "That fence is significantly over the line." 8 feet, I asked. Let me measure before I commit to a number, but yes, approximately that. He turned to his assistant. "Get the GPS equipment set up. We are going to document every inch of this." For the next 3 hours, Tom and his assistant worked methodically, using a combination of GPS technology, traditional surveying equipment, and reference to the original property survey. They measured, photographed, took notes, and created a detailed map of both my property and Helen's, clearly showing where the actual boundary was versus where her fence had been installed. Helen came out about an hour into the survey, her expression stormy. "What is going on here?" "I am having my property resurveyed," I said calmly. "As I mentioned in my email last night." "This is harassment," she said. "I am going to file a complaint with the HOA board." "You are the HOA president, Helen. Are you going to file a complaint with yourself?" She ignored that, turning to Tom instead. "Whatever you are measuring is wrong. The property line is where I placed that fence." Tom, who had been kneeling beside a GPS unit, stood up and faced her with professional courtesy. "Madam, I have been a licensed surveyor in California for 38 years. The property line is clearly marked with the original developer stakes, and I have cross-referenced with county records, the original plat map, and GPS coordinates. Your fence is 8 feet and 3 inches over the property line at the back boundary, and 7 feet 11 inches over at the front, creating an irregular strip of encroachment averaging approximately 8 feet. Helen's face went red. "That is impossible." "It is documented fact," Tom said, gesturing to his equipment. "I will be providing Mr. Kelly with a full certified survey report, which can be used in legal proceedings if necessary. I would strongly suggest you halt any further fence installation and consult with your own surveyor." "I do not need my own surveyor. I am the HOA president, and I say the fence stays where it is." Tom looked at me, then back at Helen. "That is your choice, madam, but you should know that you are in violation of California property law. Mr. Kelly would be well within his rights to have the fence removed and to sue for damages." Helen turned and stormed back into her house without another word. The fence crew, who had shown up during the survey and been standing around awkwardly, looked at each other uncertainly. "What do we do?" one of them asked. Tom answered before I could. "If I were you, I would not install another inch of that fence until this is legally resolved. You do not want to be party to property theft." They packed up their equipment and left within 15 minutes. I watched them go, then turned to Tom. "How soon can I get that report?" "I will have it for you by Friday. It will include measurements, photographs, GPS data, comparison to the original survey and county records, and my professional certification. It will hold up in any court in California." "Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate you getting out here so quickly." He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I have seen this before, people thinking they can just claim land because they are in a position of power. The law is very clear about property rights. Good luck, Mr. Kelly." After Tom and his assistant left, I stood in my backyard, looking at the partially completed fence that cut through my property like an insult. 8 feet might not sound like much, but it represented a significant portion of my yard. My property was not huge to begin with, just a 1/4 acre, which made Helen's land grab even more egregious. That strip of land included part of my vegetable garden, where I had been growing tomatoes and peppers, and came within 2 feet of my storage shed. I spent the rest of that day documenting everything again with my own camera, making notes about which plants had been disturbed by the fence installation, and calculating what this was going to cost Helen once I took legal action. I was not a vindictive person by nature, but she had literally stolen part of my property and showed no remorse about it. If anything, she seemed to think her position as HOA president gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. That afternoon, I received an email from another HOA board member, a man named Douglas Reed who lived 3 streets over. "Carter, I received your email about the fence dispute. I want you to know that Helen did not consult with the rest of the board before installing this fence. Several of us are very concerned about her unilateral actions. Please keep us informed about the survey results. Douglas." That was interesting. It suggested that Helen had been acting entirely on her own, using her position as HOA president as a shield for what was essentially a personal land grab. I replied to Douglas, thanking him for reaching out and promising to send him a copy of the survey report as soon as I received it. Friday arrived, and true to his word, Tom Martinez emailed me a PDF of the complete survey report. It was thorough, detailed, and damning. The report clearly showed that Helen's fence encroached on my property by an average of 8 feet across the entire 60-foot width of our shared boundary. It included photographs with measurements overlaid, GPS coordinates, references to the original 1998 developer survey, county property records, and Tom's professional certification. At the end, he had included a calculation of the encroached area, 480 square feet. I printed 3 copies of the report. One I kept for myself, one I mailed to Helen via certified mail, and one I sent to Douglas Reed and the other HOA board members. Then I called a real estate attorney that a friend had recommended, a woman named Jennifer Morrison who specialized in property disputes. "Mr. Kelly, I have reviewed the survey report you emailed me," Jennifer said when she called me back later that afternoon. "This is a very clear case of property encroachment. You have several options. First, you can demand that she remove the fence at her own expense. Second, you can sue for trespass and property damage. Third, you can file a complaint with the county. I would recommend doing all 3 simultaneously to maximize pressure." "What kind of damages are we talking about?" I asked. "Well, there is the cost of your survey, $1,500, which she should absolutely reimburse. There is the damage to your landscaping and garden, which you should document with receipts and photographs. There is potential loss of property value due to the reduced lot size. And there is punitive damages for willful trespass, since she continued the fence installation even after you objected. You could easily be looking at $20,000 to $30,000 if this goes to court, possibly more if we can prove she acted in bad faith. I thought about Helen's email, where she had essentially told me the fence was staying regardless of what I thought. I think bad faith would be easy to prove. Then I suggest we send her a formal demand letter. It will outline the situation, present the survey evidence, demand removal of the fence within 30 days, and demand compensation for damages. If she refuses, we file suit. I charge $250 an hour, but I think we can resolve this quickly. Most people back down when confronted with clear evidence and the threat of significant legal costs. Let us do it, I said. Jennifer drafted the demand letter that same day. It was 3 pages of dense legal language that boiled down to: remove the fence, pay damages, or get sued. We sent it certified mail, requiring Helen's signature upon receipt. While we waited for her response, I also filed a formal complaint with the Riverside County Code Enforcement Office, providing them with a copy of the survey report and photographs of the encroachment. Helen signed for the certified letter on Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, I had her response, and it was exactly what I expected. She refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, claimed that her research supported the fence placement, and stated that, as HOA president, she had the authority to make decisions about property boundaries within Oak Ridge Estates. It was legal nonsense, and it was clear she had not consulted with an attorney before responding. "This is good for us," Jennifer said when I forwarded her Helen's response. "She is essentially admitting that she knew about your objection and chose to proceed anyway." That strengthens our bad faith argument significantly. I will file the lawsuit tomorrow. The lawsuit was filed in Riverside County Superior Court on Wednesday, exactly 2 weeks after I had first discovered the fence. I sued Helen personally for trespass, property damage, and intentional interference with property rights. I demanded removal of the fence, compensation for the survey costs, compensation for damaged landscaping, and $15,000 in punitive damages. Jennifer assured me we would likely end up settling for less, but it was important to start with a strong position. Helen was served with the lawsuit papers on Thursday. By Friday, all hell had broken loose in Oak Ridge Estates. Apparently, Helen had sent out a neighborhood-wide email through the HOA mailing list, claiming that I was suing the HOA over a minor property dispute, and that all residents might see their HOA fees increase to cover legal costs. This was a complete misrepresentation of the situation, since I was suing her personally, not the HOA, but it got everyone's attention. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors. Some were angry at me for supposedly costing them money. Others were confused about what was actually happening. A few, particularly those who had been on the receiving end of Helen's HOA tyranny over the years, were quietly supportive. I spent the entire day explaining the situation over and over, referring people to the survey report, which I had posted on my personal website, and correcting Helen's misinformation. By Saturday, a small revolt was brewing within the HOA. Douglas Raid and 2 other board members called for an emergency meeting to discuss Helen's actions. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center, and all residents were invited. Helen tried to cancel it, claiming as president she had the sole authority to schedule board meetings, but Douglas pointed out that the HOA bylaws allowed any 3 board members to call an emergency meeting over the president's objection. The community center was packed on Tuesday evening. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. I arrived early and sat in the front row, my printed copies of the survey report stacked beside me. Helen sat at the board table with the other 4 board members, her expression rigid with anger. Douglas Reed called the meeting to order. "We are here tonight to discuss concerns about recent unilateral actions taken by our HOA president, specifically the installation of a fence that appears to encroach on a resident's property. Carter Kelly is here to present evidence of this encroachment." "Carter, would you like to come up?" I walked to the front and connected my laptop to the projector. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through the entire situation, showing photographs of the fence installation, the survey report with its clear measurements, and the email correspondence where Helen had dismissed my concerns. I kept my tone factual and calm, letting the evidence speak for itself. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a woman in the back raised her hand. "So Helen just decided to steal part of your yard?" "That is certainly what the survey evidence shows," I said carefully. Another resident stood up, an older man I recognized from 3 doors down. "I had a similar issue with Helen last year. She claimed my driveway extension violated HOA rules and demanded I remove it, even though I had documentation showing it was there when I bought the house. She threatened to fine me $1,000. I ended up paying a lawyer $500 to make her back off." More people started sharing their own stories of Helen's overreach as HOA president. Fines for tiny violations, demands for landscaping changes that were not actually in the HOA rules, threats of liens on properties. A picture emerged of someone who had been using her position not to serve the community, but to exert power over her neighbors. Helen finally stood up, her face flushed. "This is ridiculous. I have been volunteering my time to keep this community beautiful and maintain property values. Carter is blowing a simple boundary dispute completely out of proportion. Surveys can be wrong. Property lines are not always clear. I was acting in good faith to maintain clear boundaries." "You were acting in good faith?" I asked, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Helen, you installed a fence 8 feet into my property without getting a survey, without consulting the HOA board, and you continued the installation even after I objected. How is any of that good faith?" "I did my research," she said stubbornly. "What research?" "Show me the documents you relied on." She did not answer, which was answer enough. Douglas Reed cleared his throat. "Helen, did you get a survey before installing this fence?" "I did not think I needed one," she said. "I knew where the property line was." "But you were wrong," Douglas said. "And now the HOA could be dragged into a costly legal battle because of your mistake." "Carter is suing me, not the HOA," Helen shot back. "But you used your position as HOA president to justify your actions," another board member, a woman named Patricia, said. "You told the fence company you had HOA authority. You sent emails using the HOA mailing list. You have created a liability for all of us." The meeting went on for another hour, getting increasingly heated. By the end, the board had voted 4-1, with only Helen dissenting, to formally censure her and require her to resolve the property dispute within 60 days or face removal from the board. They also voted to send a letter to all residents clarifying that my lawsuit was against Helen personally, not the HOA, and that HOA fees would not be affected. Helen stormed out of the meeting before the final vote, her face red with humiliation and anger. I felt a moment of sympathy for her, but it was brief. She had brought this on herself through arrogance and refusal to admit a mistake. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer continued to push the lawsuit forward. We entered the discovery phase, where both sides exchanged information. Helen had finally hired her own attorney, a young guy who seemed overwhelmed by the clear evidence against his client. He reached out to Jennifer to discuss settlement possibilities. "They want to settle," Jennifer told me over the phone. Helen is willing to remove the fence and pay for your survey, but she is refusing to pay any additional damages. Her attorney claims she made an honest mistake and that punitive damages are excessive. An honest mistake would be being off by a few inches, not 8 feet, I said. And she was explicitly told she was wrong before she finished the fence. She kept going anyway. I agree completely, which is why I told her attorney we are not budging on the demand. We have a strong case, and I think when she sees what her own legal bills are adding up to, she will be more motivated to settle. Jennifer was right. As the weeks passed and legal costs mounted, Helen's position became increasingly untenable. Her attorney had to hire his own surveyor, who confirmed Tom Martinez's findings almost exactly. The fence was 8 feet over the property line, give or take a few inches. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Helen had been wrong, and the evidence was irrefutable. The county code enforcement also issued a violation notice, giving Helen 30 days to remove the fence or face daily fines of $250. That seemed to be the final straw. Her attorney called Jennifer to propose a serious settlement discussion. We met at Jennifer's office on a Thursday afternoon in late June. Helen arrived with her attorney, looking exhausted and defeated. The past 2 months had clearly taken a toll on her. We all sat around a conference table, and Jennifer laid out the damages we were claiming. Survey costs, $1,500. Landscaping and garden damage, documented at $850. Property devaluation due to encroachment, estimated at $5,000 based on comparable sales data. Legal fees to date, $6,000. Punitive damages for willful trespass, $10,000. Total demand, $22,350 plus removal of the fence at Miss Patterson's expense. Helen's attorney winced. My client cannot afford that. Then she should not have built a fence on someone else's property, Jennifer said calmly. Mr. Kelly has been more than patient. He gave Miss Patterson multiple opportunities to correct this before filing suit. She refused at every turn. Now she has to face the consequences. What if we remove the property devaluation claim? Helen's attorney asked. And reduce the punitive damages? Jennifer looked at me. This was ultimately my decision. I thought about everything Helen had put me through, the stress, the time wasted, the violation of having part of my property literally taken from me. But I also thought about the fact that dragging this out further would cost everyone more money and more time. I will drop the property devaluation claim, I said, but the punitive damages stay. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. Final offer, $17,350 plus fence removal, or we go to trial. Helen's attorney conferred with her in whispers for several minutes. Finally, she nodded, her expression bitter. Fine. We agree. The settlement was formalized in writing that day. Helen had 30 days to pay the $17,350 and to completely remove the fence, restoring my property to its original condition. If she failed to do either, the full judgment would increase to $25,000, and I could pursue further legal action. Helen wrote me a check the next week, her hand shaking slightly as she signed it. The fence came down 3 days later, removed by a different crew than the one that had installed it. I watched from my kitchen window as the posts were pulled up, the chain link rolled away, and the holes filled in. It took them most of a day, but by evening my property line was clear again. The damaged garden beds were a bit more complicated. I hired a landscaper to repair the damage and restore the plants that had been destroyed. Helen was required to pay for that too, per the settlement agreement, which added another $1,200 to her costs. All told, The fence that she had thought would solve some imaginary property dispute ended up costing her nearly $20,000 in direct payments to me, plus her own legal fees and surveyor costs, which I estimated were at least another $5,000 or $6,000. But the financial cost was not the end of Helen's troubles. The HOA board, emboldened by the resolution of the lawsuit and the clear evidence of her poor judgment, voted to remove her as president. Douglas Reed took over the role, and one of his first actions was to implement new rules requiring board approval for any significant property modifications, including fencing. The rule was nicknamed the Helen Rule by residents, though never officially. Helen's reputation in Oak Ridge Estates was destroyed. People who had once feared her fines and disapproval now openly mocked her. She stopped attending HOA meetings, stopped participating in community events, and largely retreated from neighborhood life. I saw her occasionally from a distance, getting her mail or leaving for work, but we never spoke again. For my part, I was just relieved to have my property back. I replanted my garden beds with tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, and that summer I had the best harvest I had ever grown. Every time I walked through that section of my yard, I thought about how close I had come to permanently losing it because one person thought her position gave her the right to take whatever she wanted. The following spring, Helen put her house up for sale. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she was moving to Arizona to be closer to her daughter. Part of me felt bad about how everything had turned out. She had clearly been unhappy, probably long before the fence incident, and her need to control everything around her had been a symptom of deeper issues. But another part of me felt she had gotten exactly what she deserved. Property rights are fundamental, and anyone who violates them, especially someone in a position of authority, needs to face consequences. The house sold quickly to a young couple with 2 small children. They were friendly, respectful of boundaries, and completely uninterested in HOA politics. When they moved in, I brought over a welcome basket with some local restaurant gift cards and a bottle of wine. "Thank you so much," the wife, whose name was Miranda, said. "We are so excited to be here. Everyone in the neighborhood has been so welcoming." "Just watch out for the HOA rules," I said with a smile. "They are pretty strict about things like lawn height and paint colors." "Oh, we read all of that before we bought," her husband Mark said. "Seems reasonable. Better than our last neighborhood, where people just did whatever they wanted and properties looked terrible." I did not tell them about the fence incident. It did not seem relevant, and I did not want to start their time in Oak Ridge Estates with negative stories. They would figure out the neighborhood dynamics on their own soon enough. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it gets in a planned community with an active HOA. I paid my dues, kept my lawn at the regulation height, and avoided any behavior that might attract board attention. Douglas Reed turned out to be a much more reasonable HOA president than Helen had been, focusing on actual community improvements like fixing the playground equipment and organizing neighborhood events, rather than nitpicking residents over minor violations. About 6 months after Helen moved away, I received an email from her. It was brief and formal, but there was something in the tone that suggested genuine regret. "Carter, I know this email is long overdue, but I wanted to apologize for the fence situation. I was wrong, both about the property line and about how I handled your objections. I let my role as HOA president go to my head, and I thought I knew better than everyone else. The truth is, I was going through some difficult personal things at the time, and I took it out on you and other neighbors. That was not fair. I hope you are doing well, and I hope the new owners are good neighbors. Helen." I read the email several times, considering how to respond, Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence be my answer. But another part remembered how defeated she had looked during that settlement meeting, how much the entire situation had cost her in money, reputation, and dignity. She had made a serious mistake, but she was trying to own it now, even if it was late. I wrote back, "Helen, thank you for the apology. I appreciate you taking responsibility. I hope things are better for you in Arizona. Take care, Carter." It was not a warm response, but it was not cold either. It felt right, a way to close the door on the whole mess without slamming it. Looking back on the entire experience now, several years later, I think about what I learned. The most obvious lesson is to document everything. If I had not taken those initial photographs, if I had not gotten the survey done immediately, if I had not kept copies of every email and letter, the outcome might have been very different. Helen could have claimed the fence had been there for years, or that I had given permission, or any number of things that would have muddied the legal waters. The second lesson is that people in positions of power, even small local power like an HOA presidency, can convince themselves that they are above the rules. Helen genuinely seemed to believe that her title gave her special rights, that she could make decisions about other people's property without consequence. It was a form of petty tyranny that probably exists in thousands of HOAs across the country, and the only way to fight it is to stand up with facts, evidence, and if necessary, legal action. The third lesson is that most disputes can be resolved if both parties are willing to be reasonable. If Helen had simply said, "Oh, I made a mistake, let me get my own survey to verify," this entire situation could have been avoided. Instead, her pride and stubbornness turned a correctable error into a legal nightmare that cost her more than $20,000 and her position in the community. My property line is now clearly marked with permanent stakes that I had installed after the fence came down. They are bright orange and impossible to miss, and I check them periodically to make sure they are still in place. My garden flourishes in the space that Helen once tried to claim, producing vegetables every summer that I share with neighbors. The storage shed that was nearly surrounded by her fence is still there, still accessible, still mine. Sometimes I see Douglas Reed at the neighborhood park or the community pool, and we chat about HOA business or upcoming events. He often jokes that I should run for the board, that my experience would be valuable. I always decline. I have had my fill of HOA drama, and I am content to pay my dues, follow the rules, and live my life without the complications that come with community governance. But I keep the survey report, the settlement agreement, and all the documentation from the fence incident in a fireproof safe in my home office. Not because I expect to need them again, but as a reminder. A reminder that property rights matter, that evidence wins over authority, and that sometimes the cost of doing the right thing, of standing up for yourself against someone who thinks they can push you around, is worth every penny and every moment of stress. The young couple who bought Helen's house turned out to be wonderful neighbors. Their children play in the backyard, their laughter carrying over the property line that was once the subject of so much conflict. When I hear those sounds, I am grateful that I fought back, that I did not let Helen's fence stand. Because property is not just about land and boundaries, it is about home, about the space where you build your life. And no one has the right to take that from you without facing the consequences. Helen's fence cost her $22,000 when you add up the settlement, her legal fees, her surveyor, and all the other expenses she incurred. But it cost her much more than that in reputation, relationships, and peace of mind. She learned the hard way that being HOA president does not make you a dictator, that other people's rights are just as important as your own perceived authority. And that mistakes, especially when compounded by arrogance and refusal to admit fault, can have consequences that echo for years. As for me, I learned that I am stronger than I thought, that I can stand up to bullies even when they have titles and positions, and that the law, for all its complexity and expense, still protects the fundamental rights that make civilization possible. My property is mine, clearly surveyed, properly marked, and safe from encroachment. And that knowledge, that security, is worth more than any dollar amount Helen paid. The fence is gone, but the lessons remain. And every summer, when I harvest tomatoes from the garden bed that Helen once tried to claim, I remember how close I came to losing that space, and how good it feels to have fought for what was rightfully mine and won.